So we asked the question again this morning. Who is Jesus? John 1:14 records it like this. And so the Word became human and made his home among us. He was full of unfailing love and faithfulness. And we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son. John testified about him when he shouted to the crowds, "This is the one I was talking about when I said, 'Someone is coming after me who is far greater than I am, for he existed long before me.' From his abundance we have all received one gracious blessing after another. For the law was given through Moses, but God's unfailing love and faithfulness came through Jesus Christ." Last week we looked at the idea that Jesus is the Son of God, meaning that Jesus has the identity of God, he has all the characteristics of God, that he is God in all ways. And we learned that Jesus always existed just like the Father has always existed, that he and God are of one essence, and I know that we're kind of looking at that whole Trinity type thing. We remember that that Jesus is not a created being, that he is of the Father, but he is not a created being, and he will continue to exist eternally with the Father. Jesus is the Son of God. And that, remember, Peter declared that in Matthew. He said, Jesus was saying, "Who are you?" And Peter says, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." However, there is another name, a name that Jesus often uses for himself. He talks about himself in the third person. And we say, why does Jesus talk about himself in the third person like that? Like I said, wouldn't it be weird if you would talk about yourself in the third person saying, "Hey, who is Dale Argott?" Remember, we said that's just really weird. But Jesus talks about himself in third person, calling himself the Son of Man. And Jesus asked, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" And the disciples said, "Well, there is definitely a prophetic element to Jesus." And so we learned that he was a prophet, but so much more. And so if Jesus is the Son of God and has the identity of God and the characteristics of God, and now he also calls himself the Son of Man, what does that mean? Well, it means that Jesus must also have human characteristics and carries the characteristics of humans and the identity of us. When we just read from John's Gospel and we heard these words, that the Word became human and made his home among us. So we can conclude that if the Son of God is divine, then the Son of Man is human. Now I know immediately you're going, okay, I've already got questions. Well, you're going to have to wait till next week so we can resolve this whole Son of God, Son of Man thing. But today we want to exclusively look at who the Son of Man is. And that, like I said, there's a great word. I can't wait to unload it on you. I'm not even going to give you a hint to it. But it's really cool. Today, this is what we declare today. We declare today that Jesus was a boy like me and a man like you. That's what we're going to look at today. There is a big $5 theological word. And I preached this message on Friday night over at Emmaus Road. It's amazing. God somehow, with barely being able to walk, God allowed me to lead the musical worship and preach. I sat down, so there's a praise. I'm standing up to preach for you this morning. That's a real praise. But theology means, we often think, well, we leave theology to the theologians. I want to declare that each one of us is a theologian. What does theology mean? Theology means words about God. So if you speak words about God, guess what? You are a theologian. So just about everyone is a theologian, because there are some who say God doesn't exist. So they are a theologian. And we say that God exists and that Jesus is his Son. We are theologians. And there's another fancy word that we're going to take a look at. A big $5 word that's the incarnation. And I guess you could best describe incarnation as like this. Most of us have heard the story of the little boy, and it was a stormy night. And Dad was trying to get him to bed, and every time he got him to bed, the thunder would crash, and the lightning would flash, and the little boy kept calling his dad, "Dad, I need you." And the dad would come, he goes, "God is with you. Jesus is with you." And Dad would go back to his room. And again, the boy would call, "Dad, I need you." And he would come and he says, "Jesus is with you." Finally, after about 5 or 6 times, the dad came in and he goes, "Jesus is with you." He goes, "But Dad, I need Jesus with skin on." Jesus is God with skin on. He is enfleshed. He came in the flesh. God had skin. God had bones. God had fingernails. He even had a big toe. And sometimes I wonder, did Jesus have gout? But Jesus even had a belly button. Sometimes we make Jesus so holy that we forget that he was a human being, just like us. That's what we celebrate at Christmas. We celebrate the incarnation. And so Jesus was God, and he came to us as a baby. And Jesus really lived quite an ordinary life. He was born in an insignificant town. He was born in the oh little town of Bethlehem. You are just a small Judean village. He was born to a poor couple, Mary and Joseph, a carpenter's son. They were so poor that when it came to time to dedicate Jesus, instead of a lamb, they brought 2 doves. Jesus cried. Jesus cooed. He spit up. And we don't like to think about this, but guess what? Jesus messed his diaper. He did all the things that human babies are supposed to do. He was a human. He grew up in the Galilean town of Nazareth, tucked away in the Judean hills. In John's Gospel, we hear this question, Nazareth? Can anything good come out of Nazareth? I think people, it was so funny yesterday, we were at a funeral, I was at a funeral, Pam was teaching a seminar at Wesleyan Church of Hamburg, and I was up at the funeral for one of our district pastors. And Carl Eastlack, who pastored at Eastern Hills and now is the district superintendent in the Lehigh Valley, the Penn Jersey district. I got the chance to talk to him, and he goes, "Yeah," and I was amazed that he even knew where I lived. He goes, "Yeah, he was introducing me to someone, and he goes, "Yeah, he pastors a church in Eldred, Pennsylvania," and the lady goes, "Oh, I know where Eldred is." I'm like, wow. Well, her family's originally from Rowlett, so I thought it was pretty cool. But Nazareth, does anything come good from Rowlett? Or Eldred? Or Rue? These are the kind of places that Jesus was from. You know, Jesus was a small town boy. Jesus didn't come from the big city. We have lots of names for places like Nazareth. Boondocks, Hicksville, Backwards, Podunk. It's not a compliment when he said, "Does anything good come out of Nazareth?" And guess what? Jesus was a small town child, small town boy, just like you and me. He was the son of a carpenter. He probably even learned his dad's trade. The late Rich Mullins, who was a Christian songwriter, who died tragically in a car accident back in the 90s. He had a song that inspired the title of this message, Boy Like Me, Man Like You. Listen to some of these questions that Rich Mullins had about Jesus, about this incarnation. Did you grow up hungry? Did you grow up fast? Did the little girls giggle when you walked past? Did you wonder what it was that made them laugh? Did you wrestle with the dog and lick its nose? Did you play beneath the spray of a water hose? Did you ever make angels in the winter snow? Did you ever get scared playing hide and seek? Did you ever try not to cry when you scraped your knee? Did you ever skip a rock across a quiet creek? Think about it. Jesus was a boy just like we were children, and he did a lot of the things. We hear that Christmas carol, and I don't like to sing the second verse of Away in a Manger because it says, away in the manger, no crying he makes. Wait a second. Jesus was a baby. Jesus was a child. He did the things. I'm sure he scraped his knee lots of times. Boys do that. Boys tend to end up with weird accidents. Mullins talks about Jesus being born in a manger, and then he says that I was born in Reed Memorial in Richmond, Indiana. He says, I grew up in Indiana. Jesus, you grew up in Galilee. And so I want to declare that the Son of Man is human, just like us. Jesus had a human birth. Luke 2:7. We're going to hit a little bit on the Christmas story this morning. Luke tells us, the medical doctor tells us that she gave birth to her firstborn son, and she wrapped him snugly in strips of cloth and laid him in a manger because there was no lodging available for them. Jesus had a human birth. Secondly, Jesus had human development. How many of you remember the motto to CYC? I still remember it. Luke 2:40. Again, Luke is the one who really records Jesus' human childhood development. There the child grew up healthy and strong. He was filled with wisdom, and God's favor was upon him. And then here's the verse I remember from CYC. And Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. Jesus had human development. So he had a human birth. He had human development. He had all the essential elements of human nature. Jesus had a human body. He was not a spirit. You couldn't go up and you actually if you poked Jesus like that, you actually ran into flesh and blood. He was not spirit. Matthew 26:12. He had a human body. She has poured this perfume on me to prepare my body for burial. John 2:21. But when Jesus said this temple, he meant his own body. Jesus had a real body just like we do, that had all the aches and pains that we do. I know sometimes, again, it's hard to imagine that Jesus would have caught a cold. But guess what? Jesus caught colds. Jesus had headaches. Jesus, we'll see this in just a moment, Jesus had all the human characteristics except one. And that was sin. Other than that, he was human in every way like we are. Jesus had reason and will. Matthew 26:38. He told them, my soul is crushed with grief to a point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. In Mark 2:8, Jesus knew reason. He knew immediately what they were thinking, so he asked them, why do you question this in your hearts? Jesus had human names. There are several that are recorded. Matthew 1:21. And she will have a son, and you are to name him Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. Then there's the name he often called himself. He never said, hey, who do you think Jesus is? He said, who do you think the Son of Man is? Matthew 8:20. But Jesus replied, foxes have dens to live in, and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to even lay his head. Matthew 11:19. The Son of Man, on the other hand, feasts and drinks, and you say he's a glutton and a drunkard and a friend of tax collectors and other sinners. But wisdom is shown to be right by its results. In Matthew 1:1, where he goes on to do the genealogy, we hear that this is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David and the son of Abraham. Jesus had names. Fifthly, Jesus had all the sinless infirmities of the human nature. Letter A, he became weary. Listen to this from John 4:6. This is the story of the Samaritan woman. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired from the long walk, sat wearily beside the well about noontime. We don't think about Jesus getting tired, do we? You know, we have a long day and say, boy, am I tired. But you know what? Jesus can relate to the fact that you're tired. Or how about this? Jesus was hungry. Jesus would come hungry. Matthew 4:12. For 40 days and 40 nights he fasted and became very hungry. So, you know, can you imagine fasting for 40 days and 40 nights? Wow. They tell us we can go that long without food as long as we have water. But I can imagine how hungry he would have been. Matthew 21:18. In the morning as Jesus was returning to Jerusalem, he was hungry. So he was weary, he was hungry, he also became thirsty. John 19:28, on the cross, Jesus knew that his mission was fulfilled. And to fulfill the scripture, he said, I am thirsty. And fourthly, he was tempted. Hebrews 2:18, since he himself has gone through suffering and testing, he is able to help us when we are being tested. Jesus knows all about it. He knows all about us. One more thing about Jesus' human nature. He was repeatedly called a man. John 1:30. He is the one that I was talking about when I said a man is coming after me who is far greater than I am, for he existed long before me. And then the woman at the well. Jesus comes up to the well, and we have a little of that. You can see he was surprised for Jews. The woman was surprised for Jews refused to have anything to do with the Samaritan. And she said to Jesus, you are a Jew and I'm a Samaritan woman. Why are you asking me for a drink? So Jesus was a human in every way. Just like you and me. Several weeks ago we looked at how small things can make a big difference. Jesus lived a very ordinary life here on earth. Guess what? Jesus knows what it means to be human. He knows what it feels like to have aches and pains. He knows what you're going through. How many have ever gone into a dark room getting ready to go to bed at night, and you're walking around the dark room, and instead of finding your bed, you find the bedpost with your toe? You know, I'm sure Jesus stubbed his toe in the middle of the night, and he knows what that means, and he knows what that feels like. You know what? Jesus knows what it means to feel left out. I was telling the congregation who gathered at Emmaus Road on Friday night, the class I hated the most in junior high and high school was phys ed. One, because I was out of shape. But secondly, because every time I knew we were going to pick teams, I was going to be picked dead last. I knew Jesus knows what it feels like to be left out. You know what? If Jesus was not a human, he would not be able to identify with our very ordinary, everyday lives. If he was not 100% human, he could not identify with our happiness. Because let's face it, as humans, we enjoy happiness. But then we have those very, very dark days. Days that we're just frustrated. Days when we just said, why can't my coworkers get it together? Why is my family the way it is? You know what? Jesus had brothers who didn't believe he was Jesus. They said, why don't you come to Jerusalem and show yourself off? Jesus says, no, it's not time. His brothers didn't believe him. So we can see that through Jesus' ordinary life, that it's possible for God, for us to be everything that God intended us to be. Good, honest, kind, and loving. Because that's why Jesus came to live here on earth. One of my favorite verses comes from Hebrews. Hebrews 4, 14 through 16. So then, since we have a great high priest who has entered the heaven, Jesus, Son of God, let us hold firmly to what we believe, that this high priest of ours understands our weaknesses. For he faced all the same testings that we do, yet did not sin. So let us come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. And there we will receive his mercy. And we will find grace to help us when we need it the most.
Amen.
Where do you need God's mercy this morning? Jesus was a boy like me. Jesus was a man. I hate using that word when there's both men and women in here. But Jesus was a man just like you. He understands who you are. Where do you need his mercy this morning? Where do you need his grace? I think of the song that we sing here occasionally. Oh, yes, he cares. I know he cares. John 3:16, for God loved the world so much that he gave his one and only Son, that whosoever believes in him will not perish, but have everlasting life. That's why Jesus came, because he cares about us.